questioner says, you don't acknowledge that there are sometimes legitimate government secrets. Isn't this more about balance? Don't we need to keep some secrets?
Yeah. I think I partially addressed that earlier. However, are there legitimate government secrets? Remember, I lived in the secrecy regime for many, many years. When it comes to troop movements, nuclear secrets, and those kinds of things, right, certain sources and methods, then there are legitimate reasons to keep those secret for that time. So it's not like I'm standing up here saying there are no secrets at all. But this is where it gets conflated, meaning if you say anything, then you automatically come under the boot of the secret rules governing the classification system. That's not true at all. The secrecy system, and I'm going to be very, very clear here, is not to be used to cover government illegality, wrongdoing, hiding, administrative inefficiency and ineffectiveness, or in fact, where the government's actually threatening public safety and health and safety, fraud, waste, and abuse. In my experience, the secrecy system has become so corrupted that it's now being used routinely to do precisely that, under the color and cover of law. And when the color and cover of law is no longer sufficient, then we'll just make up the rules. It's one reason the defense experts in my own criminal case were so outraged by the government prosecution. Both Mort Halpern as well as Bill Leonard, the very individual who used to head up the Information Security Oversight Office, the office responsible for the classification system and the integrity of that system within the US government. But obviously what I had allegedly retained or had allegedly retained for the purpose of disclosure to others not authorized to receive it under the Espionage Act of all things, was in fact revealing the very kinds of activities that are actually not permitted by the secrecy system. So you have a real conundrum that under the blanket of national security, you reveal anything, guess what? You're liable. And if it's about the things we don't want you to know because in fact it is in violation of law and statute, then guess what? We're going to come after you even stronger. I mean, it's unprecedented. It really is unprecedented that this administration has used the Espionage Act as a means and mechanism to prosecute 7 Americans for non-spy activities. Non-spy. When you're painted with the Espionage Act, it's the worst thing because you're immediately put into the same category historically as the Aldrich Ames of the world or the Hansons of the world. The real spies, to say it that way, because that's how that World War I statute was originally designed. As troubled as it is in terms of the Constitution, it was designed to go after spies, not truth tellers, not whistleblowers, and not people having contact with the press. It was not designed for that. But that's what it's turned into.
If we can't count on the government to design a classification of information system that is tenable for whistleblowers and for journalists, who should devise that system and how can it be rolled back now?
Personally, I mean, it's probably pretty dramatic to just throw the whole thing out and start over. It's really become a Rube Goldberg. I mean, it's now used as a hammer, it's used to cover, it's got various layers. It's gone far beyond its intended purpose. There's any number of people that I could cite right here, and I won't in the interest of time, who have flat out said the classification system is broken, period. And yet it's a system we continue to use. I got caught up in that. You have to remember what happened in my case, and has happened in too many other cases, is that the government ends up using other means to gain access to either what you know or what you have or what you hold or what you've allegedly exposed or disclosed, and then they decide what level of classification it violated. And then they charge you. So, it needs to be redone. I spent too many, one of the interesting dynamics in terms of the bureaucracy is just one of the dynamics of bureaucracy. When there was any doubt about what the classification was, You just said, hey, stamp it at the highest level. That way there's no doubt as to what it is. We'll just stamp at the highest level. That was pretty routine.
That's fine.
Part of the reason, interestingly enough, there's actually very few people in government. It's actually quite a small number who actually have formal authority to say what is classified or isn't. This is one of the things that people don't fully appreciate. The number of people that actually have what's called originating classification authority is very, very small. And normally in the system, it was designed for when you were doing public releases or you were actually formalizing a report to send out within the government or for other types of releases. That's when it would come under the review. There were the rules, but a lot of the systems allowed you where you were just to say, hey, if I'm not sure about what this is, I'll just stamp it at the highest level.
The NSA still has a program to conduct surveillance on people within our borders. Do you see that as a defeat after all that you and other whistleblowers have gone through?
A defeat, interesting enough. I mean, it's a defeat that means that they've won, to say it that way. You know, this is an area, the subject of secret surveillance is something that I live with every day. Because that's, to my horror, I discovered that that's precisely what the government was doing shortly after 9/11. And that program has only grown, and it's gone through various iterations. To say this defeat, I think, would defeat the purpose for which those of us who stood up because we took an oath to support and defend the Constitution. It would do a disservice to who we are as Americans. See, myself and others who did have the courage to stand up in spite of the risks, and in my case, facing many, many decades in prison for having done so, we knew that none of this was necessary. We knew there was no need to ever go to the dark side. We knew that the American exceptionalism was not getting away with and breaking the law because we're Americans. The exceptionalism is that the fundamental basis for national security were our liberties and freedoms. I'm just telling you, and I've said this in many other audiences, there was never any need, despite what happened on 9/11, to have ever gone to the dark side. There was never any need at that time to violate in such a vast and egregious manner the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act and turn the United States of America into the equivalent of a foreign nation for the purposes of secret surveillance. Why? Because they would tell me the following: Tom, you don't understand. We live in extraordinary times. We live in exigent, this is the word, exigent conditions. That requires extraordinary means and exigent means by which we will deal with the threat. And if it means we're going to violate the rights of some Americans, hey, they have nothing to worry about if they've done nothing wrong. The problem is we don't get to decide what it is that we've done wrong. I'm a perfect case example of that. Even in my own criminal case, both sides have to acknowledge in the end, and it's for the public record, not just what's still sealed in my case, that nothing that I ever retained, but in particular what was allegedly disclosed, was classified. None of it. The irony in my case is that what they said I had retained was unclassified information that in whole or in part was given to official government investigations, both two 9/11 congressional investigations and a Department of Defense Inspector General audit investigation. How ironic. But I knew in the first week in October when I had, and it still gives me shivers to this day, when the senior attorney in the Office of General Counsel for the National Security Agency said, Tom, the White House has approved the program. It's all legal. You don't want to ask any more questions, Mr. Drake.